and Rashida Tlaib for making the trek from their home districts to Minnesota. Our sister, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is with us in spirit, and State Senator Mary Cornish, who has been a leader on this issue at the state level. We are here because nearly all of Minnesota is in a state of drought. We are here because wildfires are burning in northern Minnesota. We are here because the Twin Cities just had their hottest summer on record. We are here because the climate crisis is here. The climate crisis is now. The climate crisis is happening, and the last thing we need to do is allow the very criminals who created this crisis to build more fossil fuel infrastructure. The data is clear. The Line 3 pipeline would nearly double the volume of tar sands, crude oil, coming into Minnesota, the dirtiest fossil fuel on the planet. The state of Minnesota simply cannot meet our carbon reduction targets if this pipeline goes through. The pipeline will impact more than 1,000 acres of wetland. It will cross 211 water bodies in Minnesota, including the Mississippi River two times, putting the public health of my constituents at risk. The Line 3 replacement won't run through wealthy suburbs. It doesn't pose a threat to the lobbyists or the stock market or big campaign donors. It largely threatens places that are put out of sight and out of mind for most Americans. The prairies, the wild rice wetlands, the Mississippi tributaries, and the treaty lands of indigenous peoples. In fact, the pipeline would directly violate the treaty rights of the Anishinaabe, territories that have been established in 1855, all to squeeze the profits of fossil fuel executives. Low-income communities downstream will also bear the consequences of this pipeline. Cancer clusters, contaminated water, deadly explosions in low-income communities might not make headlines, but they take lives. Enbridge, the corporation responsible for the pipeline, has one of the worst safety records in the country. They enmeshed over 800 spills between 1999 and 2000 alone, including the devastating Kalamazoo River disaster, the largest inline oil spill in U.S. history. They have been sued by multiple states for failing to adequately inspect and operate their pipelines. I mentioned earlier that Line 3 crosses Mississippi 2 times. We are on the Mississippi River today because this is an area that could be impacted by an oil spill when it eventually happens. Peaceful protesters have been met with repression. There have been arrests of over 700 water protectors and indigenous leaders by law enforcement that has received over $2 million from Enbridge. Last week, over 2,000 people gathered at the Minnesota Capitol to protest the pipeline. Enbridge might have fancy lobbyists and billion-dollar profits, but the planet does not care. We have no time left to avoid racing past warnings the planet by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, radically altering the planet and life as we know it. Rejecting the dirtiest fossil fuel is in the world should be a no-brainer. Make no mistake, they want to prioritize corporate profit over the lives of Indigenous women and the future of our planet. But we know that people power trumps corporate power. Joe Biden promised to be the climate president, and this is his opportunity to follow through. We have been encouraged by Joe Biden's boldness so far, including rejecting the Keystone XL pipeline. Now he has another chance to reject the polluting pipeline. We hope he will act. With that, I would like to introduce my colleague and sister in service, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley.
Hello, first and foremost, it's good to be back in Minnesota, and I want to thank Congresswoman Omar and Senator Kunesh for their leadership and their partnership, and for the invitation to join here in solidarity. We are here to shed light and to spread awareness about this egregious violation of tribal sovereignty and environmental injustice, and to hear directly from those whose voices have been ignored throughout the process. I believe the people that are closest to the pain must be closest to the power. But our indigenous neighbors, who would be most impacted by this pipeline, have had little to say throughout this process. Now, we've seen the destructive impacts of climate change, with communities of color bearing the brunt of extreme weather, rising sea levels, and worsening air and water pollution. And we have an opportunity. We have a responsibility to change that with Line 3. Low-income communities will bear the consequence of this pipeline. Instead of running through wealthy white suburbs, the Line 3 pipeline threatens the prairies. It threatens the wild rice wetlands, Mississippi tributaries, and the treaty lands of indigenous people. We must put people and our planet over profits. That is why this week I was pleased to follow the leadership of Representative Omar and to sign on to a letter urging President Biden to intervene and to reject this pipeline. And of course, there is precedence. He did this with the Keystone pipeline, so this is a no-brainer. President Biden has the opportunity and, again, the responsibility in making good on his word to be the climate president. He must direct the Army Corps of Engineers to revoke the permit for Line 3. And to Representative Omar's point, and as someone who grew up in an organizing household, my mother, may she rest in peace and power, was a tenants' rights activist. I am a firm believer that the power of the people has always been greater than the people in power. And so today we are here in solidarity with the people to show exactly that. As Representative Omar alluded to, Enbridge is the corporation responsible for this pipeline, and they have one of the worst safety records in the country. When people show you who they are, believe them. They have been sued by multiple states for failing to adequately inspect and to operate their pipelines. They can't be trusted. Now, again, they have fancy lobbyists, they have billion-dollar profits, but the planet does not care. Enbridge has paid millions of dollars for law enforcement who have used that money to harm and to terrorize water protectors. And it is an outrage. And so today we are here in solidarity to highlight the fact that low-income communities will bear the consequence of this pipeline by crossing 211 bodies of water in Minnesota, including the Mississippi. The Line 3 pipeline threatens the health and safety of millions, especially our indigenous neighbors. We must put people and our planet over profit, and Joe Biden has an opportunity and a responsibility to make good on his word, to be the climate president, and to direct the Army Corps of Engineers to revoke the permit for Line 3, just as he did with the Keystone pipeline. This is a no-brainer, and I look forward in due order to sitting with our indigenous neighbors. Again, they are the people closest to the pain. They should be closest to the power, and it's important that those who are most impacted by this pipeline be centered and heard. and they have been silenced and sidelined throughout this process. And so now I will turn the microphone over to another sister in service who never met a protest and a bullhorn that she didn't like, Representative Rashida Tlaib.
Yeah.
Thanks so much to Congresswoman Presley. Yes, I did not bring my bullhorn today, but look, I'm here to help shut it down. And at home in Michigan, we also know firsthand that Enbridge can't be trusted. Enbridge is responsible for the worst inland oil spill in American history, when Line 6B ruptured in 2010 and 840 gallons of crude oil spewed into the Kalamazoo River. It took Enbridge 17 hours. You hear that, Minnesota? 17 hours to realize a spill had occurred because their employees in Canada failed to act. Federal investigators found that Enbridge knew the 41-year-old pipeline was cracked and eroded and didn't do anything about it. It's taking decades in Michigan to clean up that disaster. And now Line 5 simply represents just another 1,000 opportunities for another pipeline rupture. Enbridge Line 5 has been ordered to shut down by Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and thank you to her leadership and courage. Enbridge has defied, though, her revocation of their operating easement and is illegally operating right now, Line 5 right now, which is an extreme threat to the Great Lakes ecosystem. Just recently, the pipeline was also damaged. Line 5 was damaged by yet another anchor strike. Line 5, just like Line 3, is a ticking time bomb. A Line 5 rupture would impact 700 miles of Great Lakes shoreline, irreparably destroy complex ecosystems, our drinking water. And a spill in the Great Lakes would devastate regional economy and 1.3 million jobs that rely on the Great Lakes, in contrast to Enbridge, who only employs, 116 people in Michigan, unlike the press releases they send out. Enbridge has engaged in underhanded tactics every step of the way. They lie relentlessly about the impacts of shutting down Line 5. They line the pockets of politicians to guarantee their support. And they've even taken to claiming that they act as an agent of the federal government in recent court filings. Again, Enbridge, you are not an agent of the federal government. That is a lie. This isn't just about supply propane to the UP and so much more, as they say. We continue to combat those lies. But again, it is important to say Enbridge can't be trusted in Michigan, and it can't be trusted here in Minnesota either. Enbridge pipelines have led to 800 spills, already in the last 15 years. There have been no environmental impact statements. Climate impacts that, in violation of native treaty rights, have not been reviewed before federal permits have been issued. And that's why I was proud to sign with Ilhan Omar and so many of my colleagues here a letter demanding that Biden intervene. The new Line 3, as Ilhan Omar had mentioned, crosses more than 200 bodies of water, including the Mississippi itself twice. The pipeline violates indigenous treaty rights right now. The areas impacted by the pipeline include huge swaths of treaty land where indigenous people that we're going to be able to hear today, that have rights of hunting, fishing, and wild rice. These practices are economically and spiritually vital to our indigenous neighbors throughout the northern Minnesota. It is also important to center on the fact that right now there is a coordinated law enforcement response to water protectors that has resulted in over 700 arrests and countless human rights violations, such as painful, tactics of less lethal weapons or whatever, but literally using resources, our local resources, and spending over $2 million by Enbridge for policing around the pipeline's construction. This is, again, part of a coordinated effort to silence us that disagree with this continued decision to allow Enbridge function. And trust me, I've seen this in Detroit alone, where I've seen literally Black Lives Matter protests brutalized by local police last summer. And we're seeing it here in Minnesota, and it has to stop. But again, we're here to really uplift and to be able to truly see and hear those that are directly impacted by this decision. And I know I love my colleagues up here, but especially Congresswoman Cori Bush, who comes with such an amazing lived experience that understands what it feels like not to be heard and seen by our own government. And so with that, I'm so proud to introduce to all of you Missouri St. Louis's proud Congress member, Cori Bush.
So being asked why I would be a part of this moment, why I would be a part of this weekend with my sisters in service, standing in support of our water protectors and so many others, our communities. I was just asked over and over again, why would I? Other than being able to be in the space with my sisters, of whom I love.
We love you.
But we can talk on the phone. We can see each other when we're working or when we're not. So that's not this. Let me be clear. We are like-minded, and we love humanity, and we love doing the work to save our planet and save the people. That's what this is about. And the fact that we have to be asked, why would you be here? Well, if we're talking, right, why wouldn't we? If we have the opportunity to save lives by upholding indigenous treaty rights, if we know that climate change doesn't stop at any border of a state or a reservation or city, that climate change will not stop because a company has a new CEO. Climate change doesn't stop because we change administration. It impacts all of us, and it impacts us directly and right now, and it will impact our children's children even the more if we're not doing the work right now. Why are we working to build a brand new fossil fuel pipeline at this time? The construction devastation that we can be a part of when we talk about historic and sacred tribal lands being ripped apart. When we're called on, we should show up. And so we showed up. And when I look at this water behind me, as close as we can stand to this water, going down those steps is as close as I get to that same body of water in my own district. The Mississippi River, I grew up around the Mississippi River, walking up to the St. Louis cobblestone, not wanting to put my feet in it because it's dirty and muddy and disgusting as heck in St. Louis, but it's still there. And when I look at this same body of water, and when we think about Enbridge, and when we think about the capacity of what they've done already, I think about what my sister just said. When we talk about 800 spills, 800, meaning we went from 1 to 100 8 times in 15 years, and they continue to do work. We're talking about if this was a hospital system with 800 problems, death, within 15 years, they would probably be shutting down. If they were anyone else, any other business, who gets to mess up on a large scale 800 times and continue and then grow, we want to promote you to 200 more bodies of water after you've messed up 800 times. The water that flows from this point will carry whatever dirty fossil fuels it picks up right on down to my district. To a district where we already have environmental injustice plaguing our community. We already have so many other issues, and this is what we will walk up to, and this is what we would allow. And so when people say, Corey, why would you be a part of that? We're talking about jobs, Corey. You're trying to shut down jobs. What good is a job if you're not alive? What good is a job if you're poisoning folks? What happens here won't just destroy those communities in the immediate area. When we talk about those cancer clusters and the contaminated water and those deadly explosions, just to name a few of the things, that will happen to low-income communities that are near and along the river. We're talking about so much more. So I'm also here because our government needs to know exactly what happens here. Congress needs to know and show up and speak about exactly what's happening. These pipelines aren't running. They're not running through downtown. They're not running through the wealthy suburbs. We need folks to pay attention. And so my sisters in service and I came to these sacred lands to stand in solidarity with the many, many water protections and conservationists pushing for a safer future for our babies. And lastly, I'll say, when you are standing up for something, putting yourself, your body, your mind, your reputation, your livelihood on the line, you're doing it because you want to see change, because change is necessary, because you really could be at home. Because you really could be doing something else. You really could be probably doing something to put more money into your household, or you could be spending more time with your children or more time with your family. You could be doing so many other things, but because you understand the urgency of the moment and you understand the weight of what's happening, you show up and you put all of that on the line. So we're here to stand in solidarity with those who have been putting their lives on the line for this work for so many years. Because they deserve it. They deserve to be heard.
Thank you, Corey. And finally, I would like to introduce my colleague, State Senator Mary
Greetings, my relatives. I greet you with a good heart. I'm State Senator Mary Kunish. I represent a district just 5 miles to the north of here, but I'm also a proud descendant of the Standing Rock Lakota tribe. And it's with that in my heart that I use this time and I use my efforts and my advocacy as a state legislature to push back on issues that are detrimental, that are harmful, not just to my constituents here in Minnesota, but to everybody in Minnesota, as well as our Native communities. I am so proud to stand here with these women who have come from all parts of the United States to stand in unity, in defiance to this multinational corporation coming down from Canada that has proven time and time again that they are not good neighbors. This is not a replacement pipeline. This is a whole new pipeline. And it's being built because the old Line 3 was allowed to deteriorate into such a state that it couldn't be used. So that shows exactly how Enbridge has not been our neighbor to the south. And for those reasons, I and these women from across the nation, as well as legislators here in Minnesota, community members, water protectors, have united for the last, 6 or 7 years in protest of this. And all we've seen is the money pouring into the communities, buying out the communities, making it so hard for communities who are in need to say no, and then realize that they are now under the influence and the power of a foreign entity. And we cannot allow this. You've heard of all the different devastations that Enbridge has brought, not just to Minnesota, not just to the Dakotas, not just to Michigan, but the potential for all the downwater pollution that is inevitable. Because we know one thing, pipelines leak. And they can say we're as careful as we can, that this is the safest way to move oil. Well, these are the most noxious tar sand composition of anything that you can imagine. And this is what's going to be plowing through the most pristine areas of our country, of our state, with the potential to do incredible damage. We've already seen that in the construction of this pipeline, there have been how many different spills and leaks. On one day, I heard that there were 9 different frac outs and spills. And when we talked to the MPCA, they said, oops, it's 12 now. And by the very next day, their own report came out as 28 spills. And just as our Congresswoman said, how many times are we going to allow this to happen? If it's happened 800 times and now we've got 828, when are we going to say no? This is the time to say no. This is the time to say shut it down. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that here in Minnesota as much as our tribes have been able to speak out against it. Environmentalists, water protectors, legislators. How many legislators, more legislators than ever, have signed on to that letter asking Biden to intervene? This is not the time to be putting this kind of pipeline into our environments when it is the most noxious, when it has the potential of, what do they say, 50 coal plants. This is not acceptable in any way, shape, and form, and we are here to say no. And so I am so proud to go on this 2-day journey with these congresswomen and show them not only the beautiful lands of northern Minnesota, the pristine waters that we have up there, but also talk to the people who will be most impacted by this pipeline. Impacted in negative ways. I've heard from folks who have stood in the waters and saw the frack out right in front of them. This is unacceptable. We cannot allow this here in Minnesota. As I was thinking about what I would say and be here to do today, I just want to bring to mind my great aunt Josephine Gates Kelly. She was the first woman chairwoman out of the Standing Rock Nation. Yeah. And she fought hard. She fought hard for her people. In fact, she took her council and they hitchhiked all the way to Washington, D.C. Hitchhiked. Because they didn't have money, because nobody was listening to them. And at every stop, they held press conferences like we're doing here, like we're going to do in the next 2 days. And when they got to Washington, D.C., because of the noise that they made, because of the attention that they drew, because of their demand for the autonomy of their tribe, the federal government listened. And they acquiesced. And that's what we are asking here today. That as we take this trip, this tour into northern Minnesota and talk to the people, the tribes, the people that are most affected, that we will take this message back to Washington, D.C., to our federal government, and they will understand that this is the time. There is no time left to shut this pipeline down. And so I appreciate all of you being here. I appreciate you traveling all the way across our nation to be here and stand in solidarity and making sure that our voices are heard, that our nation, our Indian nations are heard, because our indigenous people have suffered the most atrocious historic damage and violence and have been ignored and underfunded, not just by the federal government, not just by our state government, but by this country in general. And so I am very proud to be on this tour today, along with all of these women. We're standing next to the mighty Mississippi, and as we say in the Lakota language, Mini Wichoki, water is life. And so to you, I say Wopalatonka, Chimigwich, Pinigigi, and Pilamia. Thank you very much.
With that, we will take questions, if any relating to this.
Congresswoman, Governor Walz's commissioners have responded to some of the concerns that you and others laid out in your letter to President Biden, refuting some of those concerns. Have you seen that? And has the governor done enough on this project?
Look, we didn't write the letter to the governor. We wrote the letter to the President of the United States because we believe that it is the President that needs to intervene and stop this pipeline. The fact that the governor felt the need to respond shows us that we are moving the needle on this subject. We have been writing letters for years, at least 3, 7 for many, on the need to intervene and stop the Line 3 pipeline, and the fact that there is a coordinated effort to bully us into minimizing what we have been advocating for, and to stop us from engaging in the advocacy that we have engaged in, tells us that we are getting close to shutting this pipeline down.
Can you talk more about? Can you talk more about what it would look like if the president intervened? Like you're asking, I heard some of you say, halt the pipeline, and given that construction is decently far along, are you hoping, I guess, that he orders them to completely abandon the project, or what I guess would be next if he does that?
We're asking for the permit to be revoked, and that would shut it down.
Have you gotten any indication from the president that he's interested? Has he replied to your letters? Have you heard that he might reply to them? Or at this point, is it just...
They have been looking into it. We have been in constant conversation with the president and the administration, and we will continue to push until they say yes to our demands.
Why do you think there's reluctance on the part of the administration to shut this down, whereas they move forward and shut down Keystone?
I haven't noticed reluctance. I think it's a level of importance, and as we have been saying, and you've heard probably from the water protectors, the voices of indigenous people are often not prioritized. Their needs and their sovereignty is not prioritized. And the reason that we are here, the reason I went in February, the reason we continue to advocate and bring awareness is because we want this issue to be elevated and for it to become important enough for the president to take action, as we have done on Keystone.
Your colleague in the U.S. House, Representative Stauber, had a press conference this morning, and this might be a question for some of the other representatives up here. There was a lot of talk of they're not from here, they're not from Minnesota, why are they speaking on this? So I know Representative Bush touched on it a little bit, but if you can give some more comments on that.
All right, so here's what I will say. You know, they say money talks and bullshit walks. Enprich's donations to my colleague is working for them. He is out here advocating for them and not advocating for his constituents and the people of Minnesota who are going to suffer the consequences of the pollution that Enprich is creating and has already created. He's not advocating and standing in solidarity with our indigenous brothers and sisters. He is not being a good federal representative in protecting treaty rights, which is what he is supposed to do in the oath that he took. And finally, I will say it's actually kind of surprising to hear someone like Pete talk about workers when he has not, when he has voted against the PRO Act, when he has voted against raising the minimum wage, when he is for a right to work advocate, when he has done zero in advocating for workers in his track record, to come at someone like me who has been a pro-labor, a former labor member, advocates of working class people in this country, with his statements and his little press conference. The truth is that I am sick and tired of people who continue to challenge us when we stand up for the most marginalized people in this country.
Thank you. Thank you.
If people truly care, if people like Pete and others who have pushed back against our advocacy for indigenous people truly cared, they would be standing here with us, standing in solidarity with our brothers and sisters, in the indigenous community, they would be standing with us against polluters. They would be celebrating the work that we do every single day on behalf of the most marginalized people of this state and across this country.
Saber also brought up, ask them how they're traveling this weekend. What modes of transportation?
We're going to be crawling. How about that?
given
Question?
Representative, given the pretext that what you are all describing is a cultural war, a spiritual battle, indigenous sovereignty is linked with George Floyd, this city, indigenous sovereignty, we recognized Americans' right to have any legitimacy or claim to even exist in our homeland. It's tied to the ban on the entire Muslim faith flying into our country. It's tied to the Zionist instigation of the Nakba, which for my people, we were removed from this territory in 1862. So I know you are all walking a very fine line within the Democratic Party, and I would like to know how you are your willingness to come here means that you're willing to compel our colleagues there who sometimes have to be pushed and prodded into progressive stances. And I'm speaking about Gina McCarthy, speaking about Sister Peggy Flanagan. There's only so much that real progressive people can do within the DNC. So how is that fight or struggle going for you all?
The fight and the struggle continues. I'm sure my sisters can add to this. What we are able to do is stand on our principles, continue to advocate for those who have entrusted their votes and voices onto us to be a voice for them in rooms where decisions are being made about them without them. And we will continue to do that. I can't speak for why others haven't stood up for those that have believed in them, that have invested in them, and the people that they said that they were going to fight for. But what I can speak to is that you are never going to experience that with me and those that stand here with me today. And with that, thank you all.
Good.